studied in UCD in Earlsfort Terrace at the time, and I qualified in 1959 with first degree honours. My project was redevelopment of Moore Street, Henry Street, Parnell Street area on a fairly big scale. I joined the Professor Desmond Fitzgerald. He kind of co-opted me, and I spent a year with him, which was very interesting. Worked on various projects, but offices, some housing, but just for a year. A little bit on, the Harp building, O'Connell Bridge House, and he had some other projects on the boards, but they hadn't got to that stage, or building stage. And then he had a couple of clients, interesting clients in housing, but that was mainly what I was involved with. I moved in with Paul Burke-Kennedy in Kidney Burke-Kennedy. Paul had qualified in 1960, so I joined him then. We were generally at the same stage, and his enthusiasm and my own combined for the next 4 years. We did quite a little bit of development work, and mainly in hotel work, some housing, and then we did the competition, the UCD competition, at the end of that period, but failed to get a prize. It was an exciting time, an exciting project, but all I would say is that our scheme was not as an imaginative scheme as the winning scheme. And I think for that reason we were a bit restricted in our outlook. But that's basically my recollection of it. Well, I heard naturally that Andrzej had won the competition and that he was joining Andy Devan's office, Robinson, Keefe and Devan. So I'm afraid I made approaches to Andy Devan, and we agreed that I would join the firm and I would work on the UCD project. That was really my main concern, to get involved. So that's where I ended up. Yes, the practical development of the project came out of RKD, and I was involved from day one basically in developing it with Andrzej. The construction end, the detail, the planning application. Andrzej's experience was not a practical one. He had done a lot of design work, very enthusiastic, brilliant architect, we know that, but he relied on the experience of Andy's office, and I mean there was a lot of backup there and a lot of professional input from other structural engineers, services engineers, etc. So Andy's office had all of that, if you like, on tap. Yeah, providing the support and the relationships, which he was brilliant at, and the enthusiasm of Andy Devan. And again, dealing with clients and whatever, he was obviously the main man to deal with. His English was good, Andrzej's English was pretty good. Again, on the structural sense, he wouldn't have been very familiar with technical terms or whatever. So that was one thing that he developed. But apart from working drawings and preparation of the technical stuff, we built a two-storey full-scale model in the grounds of UCD at Foster Avenue. And the engineers arranged that we would get 2 propellers from the airport, from airplanes, to test the setup, the curtain walling between the bands and generally the structure. And we would create a rain flow, if you like, at different velocities using the propellers. Well, this was an amazing experience, but it was so effective that hopefully in the end that there weren't too many problems with the weathering of the building, because that was the element that became right through the project. The horizontal bands and with the services, and then the windows in between. But it was interesting in the process that we arranged that the gear for the window cleaners would be tested. And the report was written on this and referring to the person who did the test practicing falls from the gear and slipping, deliberately slipping, and see what the consequences were. But it's just to explain the thoroughness of the preparation. And that again was recorded by the IIRS, Institute of Industrial Research and Standards, which did a lot of the work in assessing the structure and that before we got on site, which was great help. Well, we had a fairly open setup in the office. We wouldn't have been in the same, probably. We would have been in a working section of the office, dealing with the construction drawings or whatever Andrzej had, if you like, done the design work. But we would have overlapped in consultations with the various things. I suppose his involvement in the structural design wouldn't have been as extensive. No, but I would say, now I'm not au fait with it precisely, but the assessors would have had to arrange, presumably the government or the authority behind the funding would have insisted that the person who won the competition would associate with a local firm who could carry out the project. And Andrzej wouldn't have had the expertise, and in fact they would still look for a local firm to carry it out. Well, we would have been involved in the arts and the administration block and the link work, if you like, the walkways and the lake. But at that stage, the water tower, it was a follow-on from that, and it wouldn't have been in the original construction. So the 2 buildings involved would be the arts and admin. Beyond that then, I had probably left the office before Andrzej would have been involved with coordinating other buildings or being advised or giving advice on their relationships. Well, I mean, the whole thing was so coordinated. You know, to me it was dealing with a complete composite solution, which I thought was brilliant. So that really you didn't break it down into separate elements. It was all done in one package, you know. But we had regular site meetings then through the construction period. And that is one thing we had to say at the end, that we had experienced brilliant cooperation between the builders, CISCs, subcontractors, consultants, and we couldn't believe that there were so few problems at the end. You know, we used to say, oh, well, there must be something wrong or missing. But the preparation was so well done, if you like. Even setting up the mock-ups was a great advantage. One thing I would like to say, which was very interesting, that when the bridge was erected between the admin and the arts, it was a general, almost a holiday atmosphere. And the film crew were out and the beam went up, and the CISC foreman, Jack Carmody, insisted on walking over this narrow concrete bridge for God knows how many feet. And we were all scared stiff he was going to fall or whatever. But that's just a memory. Well, it was just a very sensitive palate, and Andrzej was, if you like, the working influence on it. But even the choice, as you say, of materials and concrete was a novel development, if you like, but proved itself, you know. But one of the things that struck me, even when I read again the AJ review, and the comment even on the lead on the outdoor walkways, you know, at the top of the beams, how good it still was at that stage, and the craftsmanship. So craftsmanship came into the whole thing. Well, there was a lot of prefabrication, there had to be, to the highest quality. But we again would have been happy. The engineers were so efficient and conscientious. That was Garland's office. But the relationship was very close between Andrzej and these consultants. Well, I think it was a bit restrictive. I mean, without being too brutal about it. It was not exactly what Andrzej envisaged. The subtlety of the arts had been, and the tie-up of everything, walkways and covered ways, you know, that to Andrzej was a nice way to have a university. And circulation inside and out was so important. But not to have basically a large block with not a lot of relief. Well, except that it's there for everybody to see, and you may have to walk a long way, but you'll get there. And it's more interesting to have separations and walkways and meeting people and whatever, not to have it too compact. Yes, yep. I'm not aware of what's happening now or what renovations are happening. Well, it's basically what Andrzej came up with, you know, and to make the best of it, and that was it. There probably are criticisms of it now, I don't know what they are, but no, I think we had virtually no say. Andrzej might have been consulted, but certainly in a very minor way, I would think. Well, I do remember going up, but we had no involvement, or it was probably after the period when I was in Andrzej's office, because Andrzej continued working in that office until he went into practice on his own in 1972. That would have overlapped. He would probably have been consulted. Well, there was certainly not a lot of discussion or coordination or whatever. I think some of these things were done possibly without too much reference to the original concept. That's what I would say. No, he didn't. But again, he would have been au fait with international developments like we were. We were glued to magazines like Progressive Architecture and stuff. That was mainly to do with architecture in America, and he would have had the influence of wartime, after wartime developments in other areas, like, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, as we were, and from visiting it. But there was no specific influence he would talk about. He was very nice. We had a great relationship. I know this is not architectural, but we got on very well. Our families got on very well. I had just built my house in 1963, and we built the model of the arts admin block in the new bedroom of that house, which was not a great idea, but the space was there. But we had a very good social relationship afterwards, and had until really relatively recent years. His wife Danuta was again a very sensitive architect, and they worked together on a lot of projects after UCD, and we certainly had a great relationship with the pair of them. Well, she didn't arrive on the scene until several years later. I can't remember exactly the dates. And her interest might have been slightly different to Andrzej's, but she didn't get involved in UCD. But again, when Andrzej finished UCD, he got involved in, again, international competitions, which we all had a little bit of input into. But that was Andrzej was constantly exploring, and I remember one competition in Calabria, which again I think was a university project, but he was completely embroiled with this and his wife, and we got involved a little bit. So his interests were more like that, whereas I was building up smaller practice when we went on our own in 1972. Yes, it was 1972 that Andrzej set up on his own, the same time as I did, basically. And I did part-time work in UCD, hopefully setting up a building construction course in Earlsfort Terrace. That was the basis of my appointment, because we both reflected on inadequate technical training in UCD at the time. I don't know what things are like now, but well, I think it's fantastic what is available here. Earlsfort Terrace was really make and do. It was our studio. If you had seen it, was at the back of the building, and there was a potbelly stove in the middle of the floor, and Arthur, the kind of clerk of works in the building, used to stoke it every so often to keep us warm. But that's the quality of space was very basic. So everything here is so much developed, and I think there are certain features, and the planting is amazing. But again, in the crit, the Architects Journal crit, they comment so much on Andrzej's input questioning really where he would have got that interest. But I think it's very noticeable what he did do, every opportunity, in vistas and sheltering and, you know. So it wasn't just the architecture, the environment was brilliant. I couldn't quite tell you that. I don't know. I think again he might have been thinking of subdivisions at some stage or whatever, you know, that it wouldn't be so glaringly open or whatever. But again, the spaces, if you provide them imagination, and you'll think up some things to do with them, but I think that's probably his thinking. I wouldn't know, but I doubt it very much. Andrzej was working very much in isolation in Poland, and his awareness or even the contact between Ireland and Poland was very, very basic and not terribly friendly, because Poland had become a communist country. So Andrzej, if you like, was an alien, in a sense, coming to Ireland, and possibly in publications. I don't know what would have been available in Poland. You know, we had thankfully access to American publications and progressive architecture, but I keep plugging. Well, we had spoken to them about the hardships and the German occupation, and Andrzej's dad was co-opted on a work gang. I mean, this is so basic by the Germans to clean the streets, and they were working under those conditions in the war, and then after the war, I suppose they were under communist rule. So nothing was easy, you know, it was really a hard situation. Yeah, well, that's possibly to do with when we basically finished UCD, and we were both considering what the future would bring. And Andrzej and I discussed going into private practice together, and we mulled over it for quite a while, the pros and cons. And Danuta would join Andrzej, and we would basically be a threesome. But we basically in the end decided that we would go separate ways. In 1974 we had discussed this at length, but and in some ways, well, we both did what we wanted to. Andrzej had a more wide-ranging practice, actually, and still the practice is quite. Whereas I was quite determined to keep small and keep personal, and that's the way, basically. But we had a good relationship, and one of the events which I still look back on, 1968, when we were working on UCD, and considering the window details, we were sourcing buildings that had used particular aluminium and particular glass, and we decided to go to Paris to look at one or two buildings. This was in 1968. And we stayed in a hotel for, I think it's 2 days. First day we went out and we did our survey work and checked out these buildings, which were amazing, in the suburbs of Paris. And again, they had the culture of expansion and interest and excitement. So that was very beneficial, but following day we said, where are we going to go? And Andrzej had Polish friends in Paris, students. So, in the height of the student riots in Paris, he went down to the student quarter and spent the day there with his friends. And I decided I would go to the theatre. So I went to this opening in this beautiful theatre of a musical, The Hare, and booked myself in, sat down and waited for the curtain to come up, and the curtain came up and no cast on the stage. And suddenly the music started and the cast reappeared from behind the audience, and they clambered over us, is all I can say. You had actors kind of coming, and it was so amazing, so exciting, that it was memorable and a brilliant performance. But what a contrast. Andrzej had met his friends in the most awful time in Paris, and I snuck away. So the following day, anyway, we said that we'd have a change, and we went to an exhibition of Matisse originals. And we came home with several beautiful prints of Matisse, which we still have. That's the story of that site visit to Paris. Again, Andrzej went separate ways in 1972 and did quite a lot of work and international work. And we did our own, domestic developments, mostly apartments, school, church, housing, on a fairly low level of development, I'd say.